If you run events for your business or you've ever thought about running an event, this is the episode for you. I have Phil Mershon, who is the brains behind Social Media Marketing World, which is one of the largest events in our industry. We're going to be talking all about what you need to be doing before and during the event to make sure that people feel connected and have an amazing experience. If you've ever attended an in-person event, you know that there is a scale of event success. We have really terrible events. We have good events where you leave with a little bit of information. And then we have those unforgettable events that are so memorable that they create incredible communities on the back end of them and really lifelong friendships in some instances. Well, Phil Mershon is one person who I know who works in the event space. Now, he has written a book called Unforgettable, and he is the brains behind Social Media Marketing World, which is one of the largest events in our industry. It's the one that Social Media Examiner puts on every year. But the one thing I love about Phil is his intentional event design. He is really good about thinking through the entire customer journey from the point of purchase all the way through leaving the event and post-event, just like we talk about with our member journey mapping. So I knew I had to bring Phil in to share with you the secret sauce behind creating connection before and during your live event. Well, Phil, I am so glad that you are here with us, and I can't wait to dive into all things events, but specifically really integrating community into events, because that's what I love. That's what you're really great at and passionate about. But before we do that, I would love for you to share what's your favorite community you've ever been a part of, and what did you love about it?
I had an answer to that, and then you suggested a couple things before this call that reminded me probably my all-time favorite community was the Men's Glee Club at Wheaton College. So I was part of it for 3 years, and Wheaton doesn't have fraternities and sororities. It's a Christian liberal arts college. And so the closest thing that you got was the Glee Club and the men's swim team. We were like competitive organizations on campus, and there was huge loyalty. We not only enjoyed singing, but we had a lot of fun. We did service projects in the community. I got to travel with them to Europe. So you built deep friendships, some of whom, interestingly enough, two of the guys that I knew through the Men's Glee Club have come to my conferences with Social Media Marketing World, and one of them even sent his daughter to volunteer. So that's the level of community that was built, that I'm still friends with some of these guys, lifelong friends. In their weddings, a couple of them were in my wedding, that kind of thing.
You know, we've had a few people share things similar to that. I think my friend Scott Paley in his episode shared he was in an a cappella group in college, right? And there's this thing around, I think, specifically traveling together and performing together that creates this unique bond around shared experiences that you really can't duplicate, even for example with a sports team, unless you're traveling together and all that kind of stuff as a sports team, or and it's a smaller group. But there's something around musical groups and things like that that seems to create even deeper connections.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think in both sports and in music, adversity does create bonds, right? So the traveling together, there's things that you end up going through. I'll never forget a concert where our director stopped us 3 times on this one song that we were singing because he knew that we were off. The audience wouldn't have known, but a train wreck was about to happen. So he stops us 3 times. And then finally, we fortunately got it, because that would have been really miserable. But those kinds of things you'll never forget. But I do also think there's something about, especially with singing, because I'm a jazz saxophonist, and I think singing this is even more profound, where singing does things in your brain and body that creates connections with those that you're around. We're both believers, and there's this principle of the fifth voice in a cappella singing in the barbershop quartet. If the harmonies are locked in, you can actually hear this harmonic that's an extra voice that's not there. And one of my professors in seminary said he always likes to think of that as Jesus adding his voice into the chord, but you're hearing this like angelic property. And I think there's something that is created through the creating of music. And then, to your point, like the stories that I tell, some of them are even in my book, of traveling together with these guys, and you're doing things that are unexpected, and it's created these bonds that you'll never forget.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised that you're as creative and musical as you are because that's a lot, I feel like, of what you apply to your event creation. So I think you're probably most well known for your work with Social Media Marketing World, which is a huge, huge marketing conference that most people in my world know about. Talk to me a little bit about your philosophy around event creation. I know you have your book right here, the Unforgettable, which I love, the art and science of creating memorable experiences. We talk about this kind of stuff a lot on the podcast. Like, what do people really remember? How do you be remarkable? How do you be memorable? How do you create connection? And the way you see events is very similar to the way we see memberships and course experiences, really crafting this journey. But can you share just a little bit about your philosophy around events and how it might be different than a traditional in-person event that people have experienced?
So, what's interesting about that statement is all events on the surface look pretty similar. Like, I describe it like this with the metaphor of baking bread. In baking bread, there's really only four primary ingredients that go into it, and then you can add extra stuff to add flavor. So the ingredients are the same, but the result is different because of the baker, the processes, the thoughtfulness of how you're doing different things, the understanding of environment that comes with time and craft. And so the intentionality that's designed toward a specific audience. If I took the event that I create and help create with Social Media Examiner for marketers and took it over to an engineering conference, it probably would fall flat because engineers are a different audience. So what we've crafted is designed for the people that are coming. So I think what sets us apart is the attention to certain details. Community is a big part of that. We know that people are, especially post pandemic, but even in the whole history of our event, we know people are getting on a plane or a train or a car or a boat or however they're getting there because they want to be part of the community. They want the content. They convince the boss or convince themselves to come because there's certain content they want to learn. One of your former or one of your clients, I don't know if you still serve Amy Porterfield, but for years she would be a speaker and people would want to come and they want to hear her, want to talk to her maybe. But what they really are coming for is because they want to do this in community. They want the connections. And so community is a big, big important thing for us. And many conferences, that's not true. Many conferences are front and center is the content, and if the community develops, it might develop, but we put a lot of thought into how do we make sure that people can meet the people that they need to meet, and ideally, that is something that lasts for a long time. In fact, we know it does because people keep coming back and saying, "Hey, this is like family camp," or it's a class reunion, all meeting together at a business conference.
So a lot of my clients have events for their members, right? And some of them have events that are open to non-members. So I want to dive in a little bit to some of those elements that you think are essential for creating this kind of event where you may be coming even for the information, but you're leaving feeling a part of this community and this shared identity. I want to talk about that. But then there is this secret sauce of building community even before the event happens, because I think we've all walked into an event and felt like an outsider and left feeling like an outsider. So, talk first about what's happening at the event itself, because I think that's something that people can really relate to. But then hold on, people, don't think that's the answer, because really it's what's happening before the event even begins. That's the secret sauce.
Well, let me give away a hint toward the answer to your question because there's two different parts of the customer journey. So let's say someone has made the decision to come to your event. Their journey with your event starts on that day. And for most events, it doesn't start till maybe the week before. And you send out an email and say, here's everything you need to know, vomit style. And maybe that's better crafted than that, but it feels like a lot of information. And then you show up and you're like deer in the headlights. So, in my belief, your journey with that customer starts the day they say yes. And so you're beginning a relationship with them and preparing them. But we'll come back to that because that is part of the secret sauce that I think events need to pay more attention to. One of the things that I do that I don't know that a lot of event organizers do is I like to break down a customer journey within the event. And for sake of this conversation, let's say it starts with the moment they step on the front steps of whatever venue it is: convention center, hotel, museum, yacht. Let's be crazy here. Whatever the event venue is, it starts there. They've made it. Maybe it starts when they get in town. Like I know I was talking to Sean Quintero recently, and he's got people meeting him at the airport and they're getting in a limo and they've got signs. And if you've got a really small event, you could do stuff like that. But a large 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 person event, that's not reasonable. So start your customer journey from when they arrive at the venue front steps. That's when they are beginning to wonder, okay, where do I go now? And then think through each of the steps in the journey as you're welcoming them in, just like it's a dinner party. I think a dinner party is a really great analogy of what we're doing. We're just doing it at a much greater scale. So someone arrives at your front door for a dinner party, you're greeting them there. You've got a host greeting people, and you're thinking through, how do I make this person feel welcome? How do I make them feel like they belong? So when they're coming into a larger event, that's multiple people doing that, making you feel welcome and starting to make introductions. Hey, what are you coming from? Where are you coming from? Who would you like to meet? Questions like that, but with more intention, so that people are starting to feel like they're connected to the community, and the vibe, the energy of that moment is really critical because people are making a judgment, and that's a first impression moment. So we all know that first impressions matter. Last impressions last. First impressions set the tone. And if you have a bad tone from the beginning when you walk into a building and you're feeling lost and like, okay, what do I do now? That's a yucky feeling, and it's going to take a lot to get you to overcome that. And you might be thinking, I'm an introvert. If I feel uncomfortable and I don't feel connected, I'm looking for escape routes. I'm looking for, how do I get out of here? And so I don't want people even thinking about that. So first step is when they first arrive, and there's multiple steps within that. Like they walk in the venue, they need to know, where do I go to get my name badge, if there's name badges, or where do I go first? Like, in my opinion, the most awkward moment in an event is right after registration. I got my name badge, I've got my swag bag, if there's such a thing, I've got a guide. And then it's like, okay, what now? Do I know where to go? I don't know anyone, and maybe it's a huge venue. Where do I go next? So ideally, there is a whole experience that you've thought through all the way from the door to that first session or event or whatever is going on. And you're thinking about, how do I help people feel connected into this community? I rely a lot on alumni, and I call some of them ambassadors. We have staff. All of them are looking for the new people and helping them to feel included and welcome. What's interesting, Shannon, is there's always going to be people who choose to stay to themselves. I saw someone after our conference this year make a post and said, I came to the conference, I went to all the sessions that I wanted to go to. Then I got back home and realized that I missed out on something. I missed out on the community. Does anyone want to be my friend? And I thought that was really bold of her to admit that, but I thought, wow, that's surprising that you could have made it through the entire event without talking to anyone, but she did. And even as hard as we try to talk to everybody, it is possible for people to slip through and have the experience that they want.
Yeah, there's a couple technical things that really come to mind, questions. One is, especially for larger events, do you ever start that experience at hotel check-in, right? Because often there's like a host hotel that everybody is staying at. And then second, do you like to have visual ways, like with name badges, to identify new people versus alumni?
So, the first question, yes, 100%. Official hotels have a table there, and with somebody who's friendly, who ideally knows the area, so can make recommendations on, okay, you got here early, you don't know where to go for dinner, you could go here. They almost become a second concierge at the hotel. In fact, this last event we did, the lady was so good that people thought they could also check into the hotel at her desk. So there may be a danger of being too good at the job. But yeah, you want people to feel comfortable and be able to ask questions and know what's coming up next. And when they're getting checked in, the larger your event and the more people staying in a hotel, the more important that is. You can't do it for all the hotels where people are staying randomly. As far as, repeat your second question.
Do you have, like, with badges, do you have try to have a visual identity from new people to alumni?
For us, we've gone back and forth on that. I like having visual cues, but I also like to have simple name badges because ideally you want people not to make quick judgments. Do I want to talk to this person or not? I don't know about you, Shanna, but that's one of my worst feelings at an event is when someone looks at my name badge and sees who I am and they have already judged that I'm not for them and it comes out so quickly in the conversation. It's like, that's so awkward. Give me a chance. Like every person is of value. But I do think the larger your event, that people want the event to be broken down into smaller environments where they can find the right kinds of people. So you could do that with name badges. People can put stickers on, they can put ribbons on, but you can also do it through different kinds of meetups. And we use meetups and table talks. Other events do it different ways where you're breaking it down of, hey, I'd love to meet other B2B marketers. I'd love to meet other event professionals. I'd love to meet other community builders. Whether there's places on the calendar where people are organizing meetups, whether we're organizing it or they're self-organized. I think that is a critical aspect of events is allowing for smaller gatherings for people to find the kinds of people that they would want to meet. Because if there's 5,000 people, 2,000 people at an event, your odds are not great unless you can break it down somehow. I totally believe in serendipity, and it always happens if you're willing to say hi. But if you say hi in the right room, it's more likely to happen.
Yeah, so it's like you have the main stage and all the stages and talks and things like that that are happening, but then you have these other events, some of them coordinated by the host, some of them just organically coordinated, that are these smaller niche meetups where you can find your people within the people at the event.
100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are there any other key elements around the event that help with that connection, community, culture building?
I use a group of people called networking ambassadors who, in Malcolm Gladwell's terms, are super connectors. They're really good at meeting someone and immediately thinking about, Shanna, I just met Joe over here. You guys would really enjoy talking to each other for this reason. Would you mind if I introduce you? And so they're constantly making introductions and they love doing it. Like they feed off of it. So having people in the community, they're already there. You already have people like this, but I like to find them and empower them to do that for the life of the event. So that would be one thing that really does increase the chance for communities if you've got people that are connecting people on purpose. Another is if you've got multiple rooms, and even if it's just one room, but empower your MCs to use part of their stage time to get people meeting each other. So if you've got multiple stages and there's a room that's talking about Instagram marketing, I'm going to use our event for an example. There's a good likelihood everybody in that room is interested in learning about Instagram marketing and wants to talk to others in it about it, right? So wouldn't it be a tragedy if 400 people were sitting in a room with other people just like them that want to learn about this and they never talk to each other? So before the session ever starts, I encourage the MCs to get people talking, to break the room down, let them see other people and some of the things that they're interested in, and encourage those conversations. Because if you're in the right room and you turn to someone on your right and left and meet them, the likelihood is they might be someone you want to talk with. Another thing that I've learned more recently is when you've got an event that's established, you've always got this turnover and you've got people who are coming for the first time. So, what does that first timers experience look like? And how do you help them feel quickly integrated and connected and not feel like, there's this clique that's happening at the event? The alumni love it, but the newcomer feels like an outsider. How do you make the newcomer feel like they're an insider almost immediately? And thinking through that process, and that's part of the customer journey. So I'm thinking through not only just their first arrival experience, I'm thinking about their session experiences, I'm thinking about the peak experiences, I'm looking at what's it like at the end of the event. The event is over. How do we have a send off that feels celebratory and like this community? It didn't just stop, it's going to continue on.
I love the idea of the ambassadors, and we talk about this a lot inside of our online communities where I tell people identifying the natural leaders, the natural connectors in your community, and you don't even have to give them official title, but you just reach out to them and say, hey, I've noticed that you're a really amazing connector. You're really great at noticing when people need to meet each other. Do you think that at this upcoming event that you could just have a keen eye for that and just try to meet people and try to help them feel more connected? Would that be something you're open to without even having something official? Now, if you can make something official, great, but just that simple request can make such a difference when we're talking about what you mentioned in the second part, which is alumni. People who have been in the group for a long time tend to congregate together, and whether they recognize they're doing it or not, many of them, it can feel like a clique. It can feel like insiders and outsiders, and it can be hard to get into that. Now, I recently, well, not recently, but beginning of the year in January, I spoke in an event, and there was a VIP and all that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of alumni. Now, one connector there made friends with me, introduced me to everybody. And as a speaker, you kind of have that advantage. People want to meet you. But I kept thinking how cliquish the whole thing felt. There were these secret invites going out to, mastermind gatherings at other hotels afterwards, and all this kind of secret stuff was happening. And I just kept thinking how, as a new person to the event, if you weren't a speaker, if you didn't have that credibility being a speaker, how you would leave feeling pretty disconnected, right? Because you have a whole bunch of newbies kind of wandering around together. So I love the idea of having these connector ambassadors, really encouraging your alumni to help new people feel welcome in the group, which is something we always do inside of our online communities as well. And then the thought of how the MC is able to support in making connections happen, because oftentimes we think of MCs as your hype person, right? Their job is to make the speaker look really, really good, and their job is to keep the energy up in between speakers. But if you give them that third task of, hey, and we want people to get to know each other, and we want to make sure that every session, so usually you have session blocks, right? You have your morning block, and then your lunch break, and then your afternoon block or whatever, that every session block we're doing something so that they are meeting and connecting with the people around them in a meaningful way. That can make all the difference. And I find that I've been in events before where people do this, but they don't do it till like day 2 afternoon or something. And then what happens is your lunch on day 1 is a solo lunch, which feels so isolating in a room of hundreds or thousands of people. So if we can do something like that to where nobody is eating lunch alone unless it's simply by choice on day 1, I feel like that alone is such a difference maker.
I totally agree. It is a hard thing for an MC to understand that third task. I'll use your term, because if they are historically known as a hype person and they're really good at that, and they say, "Hey, my job is to connect with the audience, me to the audience, and to build up the speaker." Those are their 2 jobs that they see. Asking them to do the third thing is a paradigm shift. And I said it to some MCs one time, and almost none of them did it. So I asked them afterwards if they heard me say it, and they said, "No, I didn't." So I realized I've got to figure out a different way to communicate that's desired, not just accepted. And so they were all like, "Oh, I didn't know I could do that. I would love to do that." It's like, "Oh, okay." Because I was literally about to say, "You know what? You're not invited back next year." Then I realized, oh, there's a breakdown in communication here, and this isn't normal. It's not normal. And it can be done poorly. No one likes to turn to their neighbor with awkward questions. So how do you set that up so that it's like, hey, the people in this room are pretty amazing. Here's what I know. Half the people in this room have been doing social media marketing for at least 5 to 7 years. And there's a lot of expertise and wisdom, not just the people coming on stage, but sitting right next to you. So if your odds are that either the person on your right or left knows a lot, would you be willing to meet them? All of a sudden you realize actually everyone here has something to offer, even the brand new person. I think they can set that tone, but it is a new skill that some of them have to learn. Some of them are more awkward in doing it, so they have to be coached. Professional MCs, though, they get it and they are able to quickly enter into that.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to intentional design around events. So there's so many parallels, right, between online programs and events. And I talk all the time about how people spend way more time marketing their programs than they do thinking about the delivery of the program, which can be very true for events. But then even when you get into the time they're investing in the delivery, they spend about 80 to 90% of their thought and time on the content itself, which is such a small aspect of what keeps members coming back month after month, which is why we have our retain program, which is literally like, you have the content, we're going to help you with everything outside of the content, because that's ultimately what gets people results with your content and keeps them coming back. So I imagine you experience the same thing with people who are planning events where they have their speakers, they know what they want to teach, but they really haven't thought of anything outside of that. And then at the last minute, they're like, oh, we need a check-in process, or, oh, we should have a DJ or an MC. And so they just start like splashing all of these random things in to fill time gaps in the schedule. So how do you really get people to shift their thinking to where the content is just a piece of this event, but every aspect of it, every pause, every break, every request, every meetup, every thing in their program, etc., is very intentional?
The way I like to talk about this is if you're building a brick wall, the bricks of your event are those content pieces. They're the most important thing. That's what people are coming from. If you're standing far back looking at a brick wall, you notice the bricks, you don't notice anything else. The mortar, though, is what holds that brick wall together. And the mortar is everything that we're talking about that many events compromise on. So we're not asking to compromise on the quality of the content. Those bricks should be really good and be able to last like a Roman wall. But Roman's wall don't stand for 2,000 years if they have bad mortar. And so the mortar is your check-in process. It's the community that you're building. It's the MCs that are connecting bricks to bricks. It's all these things. And so when people hear that, it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's easy to get enamored by the mortar and start thinking only about the mortar, and then the quality of the bricks starts to be compromised. Like, you got to do both. You got to have great bricks, but you've also got to pay attention to the things that hold it all together. And so I think that paradigm helps me keep it in balance, but understand that poor quality mortar will cause the wall to crumble. Not having mortar, it won't stand up in a windstorm. So knowing what goes into that is absolutely critical. And I think community is one of those critical elements. MCs is another. Understanding the journey. One thing we haven't talked about in the journey is kind of thinking through service opportunities of where might something go wrong that would ruin somebody's experience, and how can we solve for that in advance? How can we be ready for it if it happens to happen anyway? And how can we make it an above and beyond experience where we turn something bad into something good? So having a service mentality, how do we serve this community? I'm sure you do the same thing for your online communities where you know where things could go wrong. What are the ways that we're going to serve people when their payment goes awry, or they can't get into the live session that they wanted to go to, or whatever it might be? And how do we make that a good experience for them where they're like, wow, I didn't expect that level of service. I'm even more endeared to this community than I would have been if I hadn't had something go wrong.
Yeah, we talk about proactive customer support a lot, not waiting for the problem to come to you, thinking ahead about what the problem is going to be so that we can create solutions before the problem actually happens. And it's interesting because I was sitting on my porch this morning for my morning time in the sun, and I was actually looking at the mortar in the bricks of our house. And it's funny because I was just thought, I just never really even noticed that before. But when you're really close, it's super obvious in these pillars that we have. But from far away, you really can't see it. And that's our job, is to be able to examine our event in a close enough way. And after this conversation, as you're listening to this, I promise you, you'll never experience another event again, because you'll be thinking about all of these different elements. And it's one of the best ways, honestly, to get ideas for your own event is to attend others and go, I like this, I didn't like this was missing. And then you can really start to craft your own event. But one of the things that is kind of underlying, we haven't called it out yet, is that there's so many audiences to serve at this event, because you not only have your attendees, right? And in your attendees, you have new people versus your alumni, which can be a bit of a different experience. But you have the speakers who need a different level of support. So you need to make sure that you have all of that journey worked out. And then you also have your team. So you have a team that's involved in showing up for people. And I think oftentimes people neglect creating a great experience for their team. And then what happens is your team by day 2, they're exhausted, they're burnt out, they're hungry. The introverts are like, literally, I can't talk to another person. So they start disappearing into the break room, And so there's so much prep and experience that needs to happen for your team as well. So thinking through all of those different nuances can be hard, but that's why you really take time to intentionally plan these events. But I do want to make sure that we have time to talk about the pre-event stuff, because you can craft a really amazing event, and honestly, the show up rate can be terrible because people second guess the value, they second guess whether they should come, whether it's worth their time, or that the introvert in them decides, oh, maybe I really can't do this. And the level of connection that can happen at an event, I think, is 100% related to the connection work that's done before. We say the same thing with memberships. Your pre-launch, whatever you're doing during your launch, should be helping with culture, connecting people. They should feel like they're part of the community before they ever hit the checkout button. So for you, that gap is really from the time they say, yes, I'm coming, and I've purchased my ticket, to actually stepping foot on the steps of the event. So what's happening in that time frame to help make connection and community easier at the event itself?
Yeah, and it's going to depend on the kind of community that you have. We have a seasonal community where every event has its own community, even though there are people that are part of the event year over year. We just have found that to be a better model for what we're doing because we have a year round membership that is its own thing. When someone first purchases, it depends on how far away from the event they are. But the first thing we want to do is send them helpful information that trains them that, hey, we're going to send you helpful information via email. This is going to be a lifeline for you. We want to get you some emails really quickly that set you up. If it's 9 months away, that's probably going to be all that we do. I don't remember even what's in that series of emails. So let's don't worry about that. About 2 months out is what I've learned is about the right amount of time before the event where people are starting to really pay attention of what am I going to do in getting ready. You do things too much farther out than that, you're not going to get a lot of interest. And the truth is, most people will wait till about 4 weeks out where they'll start to make their plans. Yeah, they might have booked their travel farther out than that and will have sent emails about that. But as far as their ability and desire to get into a community, it's about 60 days out. So 75 days out, we'll create a Facebook group and I'll get some of the most engaged alumni who are these ambassadors types that we've talked about to come in and seed the community so that as people are joining, they're starting conversations. And I've found that is like one of the most critical things that I've done. And I've not done that for all 10 years, 11 years that we've done the event, but we've done it more recently. And that one action, having good moderators, but also having the activators, the ambassadors who are in there starting conversations and engaging people as they join, set the tone that this is a community where we are here to support one another. And then people start to make connections and they start to make plans, and we provide as much helpful information as we can. And then it becomes this place where people are saying, man, this is a real community. I can't wait for the event. I can't wait to meet the people that I've met here. And I think that's the reason why this is so critical. Not only will they show up, but you've provided value before they ever get there. We'll do meetups before they ever arrive onto the event. And some people will show. But what's most important is they've made plans. They now know, hey, there's going to be a meetup on Saturday night before things happen on Sunday, or there's a meetup happening Sunday morning before things get started. Or, hey, I'd love to not eat lunch alone. To your point earlier, we had a guy do this year and say, does anyone want to have lunch with me? When people raised their hands. And so people are starting to make connections and plans and conversations. And to the point where this blew me away this year, Shanna, during our conference, there were 100 posts being created per day during the conference. And we didn't have a team watching because we assumed everybody was in person and not even on social media. Is like, oh, that was a mistake. Next year, we're going to have a team that's staying engaged with the people who are like bifurcating and still active online. Imagine that, social media marketers staying active online while they're in person. So highly critical to get people to this place where when they show up, they've already got plans and they've already got people that are looking forward to meet, even if they've never been before. I think that is the biggest value of that community. They get questions answered. They feel like, oh, these are my people. I can have the conversations that my family rolls their eyes at.
Do you have like an official directory or anything like that? Or really it's all happening through like a facilitated Facebook group?
Facebook group before the mobile app when they get on site is a way that they can connect with others, but it's not an official directory because we believe in people's privacy. They need to choose who they're sharing their information with. That's part of being a media company. We don't just hand that out, but you can search the database on the mobile app and find people that have different interests and then seek to connect with them. But we don't release the mobile app until much closer to the event because people typically aren't using it in the same way and it doesn't build community. It's really a design for in-person experience.
Yeah, and I think I like how you're really intentional about how far out you do it because you do need to do it far enough out to where there's a runway. But if you do it too far out, you can't keep their attention. You might get their attention, but then it's like you're having to like re-promote the community again. And then what does that look like? So when somebody says, I'm coming, and the community, let's say they bought their ticket 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out, is the community one of the first things that you invite them to be a part of? Or what is that? Where does that fall in the invitation and the information that follows?
Yeah, so that sequence of emails they'll get from us when as soon as they say yes, that will be one of the emails once we've opened it. So it gets added in there in the first 3 or 4 days. They will know about the community. This is a place to go and connect with others. So they'll be immediately invited into that. If they bought it 90 days out, they won't learn about it until we open it. And one of the things I've learned is if you can get that group active within the first 2 weeks, then Facebook will help you keep it active. They will show other people what's going on. If someone came to it this year and they said, I've never seen a Facebook group be this valuable for a conference. And I can't take a lot of credit for that. I can take some because I set the tone and I was the one approving probably half the people. And you could argue as the director of experience, should I have been the one doing that? Some of it's probably ADHD, but some of it's, I want to know who these people are. I want to make sure they have a great experience. And I didn't know if I could rely on others to have the same level of care. That's some trust issues on my part I need to deal with, I'm sure. But they were commenting on it because the community really did have this strong sense of energy and connectedness, and people were seeing the post, and it took on a life of its own. Like people started doing things that we weren't initially allowing. They were like doing these self introductory posts, like, I don't like that being in the feed. And then we realized, you know what? It's in the feed and Facebook's showing it to people. That's actually probably good for the whole group. So let's let it go. And they were like being really creative with their self introductions. And it's like, okay, this is a whole new thing. I love it.
Yeah, it's interesting to toe the line between like directing people how to use a group versus letting them kind of play around enough that you can see what's helpful and beneficial. I think sometimes community leaders can tend to get so stuck in the rules that they stifle things that are actually really beneficial for the group as a whole just because it's not the way they wanted things done initially. But I'm curious, how much is your team doing a lot of posting to try and get engagement and start conversation? If so, what does that look like?
We had a goal of at least one person posting per day. I've got 4 to 5 volunteer moderators who they love Facebook, who work with me. And we try to have at least one of us posting every day and getting a conversation started until the point where the community's doing it. So when we start seeing the community posting multiple times a day, we'll back off. But we're creating things like the guides in Facebook where you can find information about other people who are in your industry or niche, resources about the conference itself. Those all end up being posts and being helpful ways to gather people. You know, it's not perfect. The algorithm doesn't make it perfect, but it is at least a resource that gets people connecting that wouldn't have otherwise. So yeah, that's the goal, is at least one per day. And sometimes it's multiple people as we're seeing things. And I kind of can go in and do it whenever I see something that needs to be talked about, even if it's not on the content calendar.
This is so good because I think there's so many threads between like what I teach in my Cultivate course. If you've taken that, you're listening and you're like, gosh, this is so familiar. Yes, the strategies you've learned worked in so many different ways, but seeing and hearing how it would integrate into an event, I think is really helpful because there's a lot of people that want to do events, but I will caution people against it because I tell them you can really ruin brand reputation by doing a really poor event. So don't go into an event just haphazardly because some business coach told you, oh, you should do a live event. Oh, and you should do a live event because you can sell your high ticket whatever at your live event, right? Do it because you want to bring people together in your community and you want to create that kind of experience because it takes that kind of desire to really take the time to intentionally craft something like this. So before we wrap up, first off, I want you to play a little bit of the saxophone for us because I think that would be amazing. And then is there any like tip or little secret or little nuance that we haven't talked about that you're like, oh, you got to know this thing or you got to do this thing?
Well, I wanted to respond to what you were just saying, and this might be the little tip. So back to the analogy of baking bread. I think you've got kids. I don't know how old they are, but if you had a 12-year-old, we'll say daughter, I think boys could bake too. But if you had a 12-year-old daughter, you could give her a recipe, and with a little bit of oversight, she could bake an edible loaf of bread. It's not complicated. It's fairly straightforward. There's certain things you have to know how to do, but that might be the example of somebody who has a thriving community who tries to go do an event. Say, how hard could it be? Yes, you can go create an event. Will it be great? That is the question mark. And a great loaf of bread requires someone to have spent their proverbial 10,000 hours to get to the point of creating artisan loaves of bread. Shanna, you create great communities. You've been doing this for a long time. You figured out a thing or two. To create a great event takes time. You probably, if you've never done one, you probably need a partner with someone who has. In fact, when we started Social Media Marketing World, Mike and I looked at each other and said, we've never built an event for 1,000 people. We've both had event background, but we'd never done something like that. So we went and found a partner who could help us, who had done it before, and they set us up for success. We could never have done it without them. So that would be one thought there is if you decide, yes, this is important to my business, you want to ensure success, find someone that can help you along the way to set you up for success. Don't try to make the mistakes of the 12-year-old baker or me when I tried to put together a professional racing bike for the first time and I took it to the shop because it wasn't working. And the guy said, who put this together? My 12-year-old could have done better than this. And I felt totally ashamed.
I've had lots of experiences like that. And I will just say, I mean, your book is beyond a recipe, right? Your book talks about all of those nuances. So 100% get a partner, talk to Phil, reach out to Phil about what it looks like to have his help and support in coordinating these events. But I really encourage you all to read the book Unforgettable as well. But if you're thinking about doing an event before you even commit to one, because I think that'll really give you a clear vision of what goes into a really great event. And you'll either get excited and you'll start having ideas and crafting that customer journey for that event, or you'll be like, man, this is not something I want to do. Just keep me behind the screen doing my membership or my course or whatever, which is totally fine. Events are not required for business success. They can be a big part of business success. They can be a great retention driver, but start with the book because that'll give you a really good idea of if this is something that lights you up or not.
Yeah, that's great. Great tip there. The book you can get anywhere you buy books online. If you want to get it from me, go to my website, philmershon.com, and I do sell signed copies of it. So yeah. So you wanted a saxophone moment, but before I do that, I'm going to need to get you to help me, Shanna. So as you think on this conversation, I'd love you to tell me 3 words that would summarize it for you, and at least one of them needs to be an emotional word. So give me 3 words that
Oh, I feel like I'm in a conversation with my husband who is very good at emotions. And he's always like, I need a feeling from you. And I'm just such a logical brain. I'm always like, I don't have feeling words. Well, intentional for me is definitely one of them. Belonging is another one. And then I think excited. I think for me, like thinking about these kind of events, people coming getting excited when they buy, they're excited to show up, and they're excited to implement when they leave. That's something that I really think about.
All right. So here is our community song, Intentional, Belonging, Exciting. All right. Just for you, one of a kind for this moment. I've enjoyed the conversation, Shanna. Thank you.
I love it. That's such an incredible skill. That's like the ability to put words and emotions into music. And I think it relates so much to what we've talked about, because I think any event should create an emotional experience, right? And it's when we listen to music, it elicits emotion in us one way or the other. And when we have an event, if people come and the experience is only in their head, they got more knowledge, they gained more wisdom, they learned another tactic to try, or even left feeling overwhelmed with too many tactics to try, we've missed the mark. It's about that feeling that we want to leave in them as they leave the event. And that's where this whole unforgettable experiences and intentional design comes in.
So I'm doing some research on transformation and how transformation happens at events in particular. And I don't know if you remember the book, The Experience Economy by Joe Pine, came out like 25 years ago. Well, he's now writing a book called The Transformation Economy. And in there, he comes up with all these principles about what goes into transformation. And I thought it was interesting that one thing that does not show up on his list is content. Content is not there. There's like the staging and preparing people for it. There's customization. How do we personalize the event? There's the role of the guides and facilitators. We've been talking about those today with ambassadors. There's the engagement of all the senses, which we haven't talked about, but that's super important at a live personal event. And then there's the emotional connection. This is what made me think about this, is how important psychological safety is, and engagement and the personal connections that help people feel emotionally engaged with what they are learning. They're far more likely to make the changes necessary if they feel emotionally supported as opposed to mentally supported. And then there's the role of ongoing support and intentional design, all things that we've talked about in this conversation, which is really fascinating. The parallels, which that wasn't on purpose, but I think it's so important. So emotional connection is one of those things that if you can build that, and music is one of the ways, the senses is another way, but community in and of itself, the way that we connect with people on purpose, really does create that emotional connection that sets people up for making the changes that they want and need to make.
That's so true. And I know you have a special and secret bonus chapter of your book that's all on community that people can get access to. So what's the best way for them to get access to that chapter?
Yeah, this is the chapter that I realized I should have written, but the book was already done. So it's totally free. The only way to get it is to go to my website, philmershon.com/bonus. And for the price of your email address, you can get it. And you can always cancel if you don't want to. Stay on the email list. But yeah, I just reread it this morning. It's got a lot of great stuff. I'm really proud that I wrote it.
I love it. Well, friends, if you are thinking about an event, or if you run events in the past and you're coming up on your next one, I know that you got incredible value out of this conversation. So Phil, thanks so much for coming and sharing your experience and wisdom with us.
It's been my pleasure, Shanna.